Professor Carafit here, and we are going to continue our discussion of Chapter 32. So we've looked at the fact that structure and function are tied together. The structure of a cell, the structure of an organ, relates to its function. A lot of times gas exchange or some kind of exchange is the function of a lot of our organ systems, and they have structures that help to make that as efficient as possible. But we're also multicellular beings. We need to remember that we, as animals, have cells throughout our body, tissues throughout our body, organ systems throughout, and they all have to work together in order for us to work. And this is true for animals as well as plants and other multicellular organisms. We have to coordinate. And as animals, we have a couple of systems that allow us to do this. The nervous system, I'll talk about more later this semester, but we're going to just hit on the endocrine system for now to give you just a little bit of background. So that way later, if you take if you take animal phys, you'll have a bit of background when you get into that course. So the endocrine system works by sending signal molecules into the bloodstream, which are then dispersed throughout the body. Okay? The nervous system that we'll look at later uses neurons, which transmit signals along very direct and dedicated routes to very specific places. So the endocrine system can affect the whole body. The nervous system tends to affect very specific parts of the body. Now, signal molecules throughout the body are called hormones. So hormones are put into the blood. They just are dispersed throughout. And they can have effects on a single location, or they can affect widespread parts of the body. But the important thing to note is, while that signal will go throughout the body, only cells that can receive it, that have the right receptors, will pick up that signal and actually be able to utilize it. Okay, and so cells in one part of the body that have those signals, here's the cell, here's the signal, or here's the receptor and here's the signal. If you don't have the right shape receptor, the hormone won't dock or it won't be let in, depending on how it works. It's not going to work. So the endocrine system can be sent throughout, but it only really affects cells that have the right receptors. But those receptors could be found on lots of different cells. And this endocrine system allows the body to coordinate gradual changes throughout the entire body. So the endocrine system and the nervous system are known as integrating systems. They integrate different parts together, allowing one part of the body to communicate and coordinate with another. And so what we can do here is we can use this system to maintain homeostasis, for example, like saying, hey, you need to remove sugar from the blood, or you need to release sugar into the blood, or it might be used for something else, like, hey, there's a bear, let's release adrenaline so we can get away from that bear. So the endocrine system, the hormones that are released, have a variety of functions that allow us to control the coordination of our organ systems, as well as get ready for fight or flight, to maintain homeostasis, things like that. So the way, just to look at a very basic example of this. So here's an endocrine cell. And by the way, if you have endocrine cells all put together in a little organ, you call that a gland, right? So here's an endocrine cell. It secretes hormones through exocytosis into the interstitial fluid. It ends up in the blood. It travels through the blood, diffuses out of the blood, back to the interstitial fluid, where it docks with cells, okay, leading to a response. So there's some kind of stimulus here that causes the release of these signals, these hormones, and then they're picked up by receptors, and then some kind of response takes place. Okay. There's different kinds of chemical signaling. We're going to focus just on the top one today, endocrine signaling. That's when those signals travel through the blood, like we saw in the last slide, to cells that pick them up and respond to them. There's lots of different components of this endocrine system in the brain. Notice where the pituitary gland is. We're going to talk about the pituitary in a bit more. There are adrenal glands atop your kidneys. The pancreas is involved. The gonads are involved in this. So there's lots of different structures involved in this system. Okay, so when we have a signal sent, we have something called initiation, which starts the signal, and termination, which stops the signal. And negative feedback typically is the thing that we would use to slow down a signal, to turn things off. Positive feedback is, as we've already mentioned, occurs when a stimulus gets reinforced. We've mentioned these ideas before, negative and positive feedback, but we can see negative and positive feedback occur in the in regards to the endocrine system. For example, let's say you have a low pH in your duodenum. Okay, low pH means acidic, and duodenum is the beginning, or is part of your small intestine, and you want it to be a higher pH there. Okay, so that's the stimulus, low pH. Okay, so when we talked about homeostasis before, I mentioned stimulus and response, right? So the stimulus is low pH. That causes something to happen. In this case, hormones are released from an endocrine cell, travel through the body, and they're picked up by target cells, in this case in the pancreas. The response is a release of bicarbonate, which is basically baking soda. Baking soda causes the pH to go in the other direction, okay? Negative feedback. So this is an example of a simple endocrine pathway. I want you to know what a simple pathway is. A simple pathway is when there's a stimulus, a release of hormone, and a response. So basically you have stimulus, hormone release, and response. Okay, that's a simple endocrine pathway. Boom, boom, boom. It's released, something happens. In this case, the pH goes the other way. We're done. Okay? Now, it can get more complicated than that. So let's look at another example. The pituitary gland. The pituitary gland has two parts, the posterior part and the anterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary stores and secretes hormones that were hormones made by your hypothalamus. The anterior pituitary is a gland that makes and secretes various hormones. Okay, so here's what it looks like. It's like a two-lobed structure. So first of all, it can do simple pathways. It's called a neuroendocrine because it's kind of tied into your brain, to your nervous system. So here we have a signal causes a release of, in this case, oxytocin into the blood. It circulates through the blood, leads to a response. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a simple pathway, but this is an example of positive feedback. I didn't really give you a good example of positive feedback before, at least not anything with an image. So in the case of positive feedback, what happens? A baby suckles at a mother's breast. Okay, that causes a signal to be sent through the nervous system and eventually through the endocrine system, which causes the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin into the blood, circulates around, goes to the target cells in the mammary gland, smooth cells, that causes them to release milk. That causes more suckling and more milk to flow, which causes more milk to be produced. And so in this case, the feedback increases the flow of milk instead of shutting it down. So this is positive feedback, and this is a simple pathway in that there was a release of chemical, a response, and unlike the other example we saw, this is a positive feedback response. Okay, now the anterior pituitary, let's look at that one real quick. It secretes its own hormones and a lot of different kinds. We're not going to go into all of them, but a lot of them are involved in stress responses like fight or flight, things like that. The stress you feel before a test, all those sorts of things. Okay, and they're often involved in what we might call a hormone cascade, meaning it's a little more complicated than a simple hormonal secretion. Okay, and these hormone cascades, these hormones that are involved in hormone cascades are known as tropic hormones. I want you to know that. Tropic, kind of like when we talk about tropic levels in an ecosystem. Tropic means different levels. There's different levels, okay? And feedback can occur at every one of these levels. So what happens in the case of a tropic hormone, there is a stimulus, and then a hormone is released. And that might cause like different hormone, let's say this is hormone number 1, that might cause hormone 2 and 3 to be released, and then those go off and cause maybe different responses. Response. Okay, so that's what I mean by tropic hormones, by cascades. One hormone might cause the release of many hormones. So in this case, we have the release. We're not going to learn everything going on here, but we have the release of a secretion from the anterior pituitary gland. It circulates throughout the body, goes to the thyroid, causes the thyroid to release other hormones into the body. Okay, and those will have various effects. So I'm not going to go into an example here. I'm not going to make you memorize what hormones are in this example or anything like that. But I want you to know the difference between a simple signal and one of these that's more of a tropic hormone signal. So a simple signal is the hormone's released, it docks to target cells, cause a response, whereas a cascade is when one hormone stimulates the release of other hormones in other parts of the body, leading to a response. Okay, and then what happens next is what you may have learned about in Bio 1. Those hormones, dock to cells, or they might go into a cell if they are nonpolar, and they are received by the cell, leading to transduction to kick in, which is usually a system of relay molecules where a lot of times phosphorylation is involved. Hopefully these words are familiar to you. So the signal is transmitted through the transduction pathway, leading to some kind of cellular response. So the cell divides or the cell does something. Okay. The last thing I want to mention before we go is that one hormone can have different effects. So this last part here, this response can vary. How can that response vary? Well, if the transduction pathway is different, the response can be different. So one molecule might activate a different molecule in a liver cell versus a heart cell, for example, leading to different responses. So in this example, epinephrine, that's released by your adrenaline glands, right? It docks to cells in your liver, leading to glycogen being broken down and sugar being released into the body, allowing you to have increased blood sugar levels. In this case, epinephrine docks to a muscle cell, causing it to relax, allowing blood flow to increase. And in this case, epinephrine docks to a different receptor, an alpha receptor. We have a different response. The cell contracts, maybe in the intestines, reducing blood flow to the intestines. So what we can see here is that the same signal in all these cases. In the case of A and B, we have the same receptors, but different proteins inside, different transduction pathways, causing a different response. And in this case, we have a different receptor and a different response, right? So hormones can have different effects in different parts of the body depending on the receptors they're received by and the responses that the cells take once they receive that signal. They can have different transduction pathways leading to different responses. All right. If you don't know anything about transduction, go back to the chapter on cell membranes and review that part. But I think that's all we're going to do for today. So I'll talk to you later on, and I think this lecture and any other videos in this folder will be the material, the last of the material for exam 2.